This is the July 2020 General Aviation Joint Steering Committee topic of the month. And when we do these topics of the month in the New England FAASTeam, typically what we do is we take the base presentation that they want us to cover at a national level, and we try to take it and expand on it specifically for the things that we have seen, that we've been requested by you, that we think will help you out. And, you know, we do this in a team format, is the New England FAASTeam. Here we are right here. I'm Stephen K. Brown from the Boston FAASTO, and joining me in the aircraft is John Wood from the Portland, Maine FAASTO. You want to say hello, John?
Yeah, hi folks. I'm the one in the back sitting there with a smile on my face because Steve and I are flying. We were actually out flying over Alton Bay in Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire that day, just after we had done an Alton Bay webinar. So we were having a good time. But I'm glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, and John is going to be helping out. He's going to be the one kind of sorting out, divvying out the questions that you do have. So there is the question box that you can type in questions. He'll be helping out. Dan Carter from Bradley will be helping also. Dan is the operations FAASTeam program manager for the Bradley FAASTO. You want to say hello, Dan?
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. That's me on the left at the New England Air Museum. So looking forward to today's discussion.
The guy with the glasses and the smile, right?
That's right. Well, I guess we both have glasses and smile.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's my lead into our airworthiness FBM from Bradley is Rob Leonard. You want to say hello, Rob?
Hi, everyone. I'm the man in blue.
The man in blue.
The blue.
True, but yeah. But you guys are smiling because this picture was taken just pre-COVID, but the New England Air Museum, which is down in your district, a terrific little place to visit.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Hey, a few little housekeeping things. Everybody always does ask, but credit for the Wings program will get uploaded in a few days. So you will end up seeing that. If you do miss this or you want to see some more of this, do take a look at the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel. We try to upload the webinars that we do. It usually takes about a week. Depends upon how much editing I have to do. You know, how many times that I go, and have to edit stuff like that out. But it usually takes about a week. Also on there, you might come across, we have been working on, and we were actually just talking about it before we got started on this course, about maybe developing a few more courses based upon the webinars that we have been doing. But a couple of them that we've done are the ALC-612 course, Oh No, I'm Landing Out, and the ALC-629 course, Gliding for the Airplane Pilot. And you can take those courses online and see the associated recording of the webinar on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel and get Wings credit for those also. Now, also, there are handouts. You should have a handouts tab. This is not the actual handouts for today. We actually have two of them. One is altitude safety pamphlet. The other one is the advisory circular and the most recent revision of it, advisory circular 90-66 Bravo with change 1, which will cover some of the items we're talking about today. And if you haven't joined us in the New England FAASTeam before, but a lot of the webinars that we do with the New England FAASTeam are posted on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel after, and you can see all sorts of things like the making life and death decisions for helicopters, tail wheeling, safety wire lock nuts, Boston TRACON and Class B procedures, and many, many more in relation to it. So I do want to encourage you to subscribe and like that channel. You'll probably get some good information out of it. So today, talking about traffic patterns, just an overview of some of the subjects we're planning on hitting in our about 75 minutes that we're planning to be together, is non-towered versus towered airport traffic patterns, takeoff and landing performance predictions, how that relates to operating in the traffic pattern, collision avoidance, of course, right-hand traffic pattern operations, a little bit about runway markings and final approach, And last but not least, but because it has become a little bit more of a pressing issue from a safety factor, is runway alignment, and specifically people lining up for the wrong runway or wrong runway alignments at airports that have more than one runway. You know, and what we're really trying to focus on here is help you be as precise as you can be and understand what are usable portions of the runway, maybe help you learn how to do a forced landing a little bit better. But first and foremost is try to help you be the precise pilot that you can be, because a precise pilot is a good pilot. And we need to know and understand that we can have some dramatic differences in traffic patterns depending upon the type of flying that we're doing. Is, you know, you many of us weak with it, you know, but there is definitely a traffic flow and traffic pattern associated with towered airports, and will vary depending upon how much traffic is there and what's going on. And then you can also have, you know, maybe you're lucky to have your own little private farm field, you know, that is your airport and your airport alone. And there's big differences in what you may see in terms of behavior of pilots and traffic patterns between any and all of these runways. Now, if you're at a tower controlled airport, probably the biggest thing to remember about traffic patterns is what is known as FAR 91-123, the compliance with ATC clearances and instructions. You know, that is important. They might put you on a right downwind, although it's normally a left downwind. They will adjust on the fly for different things that are going on, what type of aircraft are operating at that moment, or maybe even that day, different things that might be happening. At non-towered airports, there's a few regulations you want to be familiar with and remember also. You know, probably the biggest one to think about is FAR 91-126 and the couple regulations that follow along. And 91-126 is, you know, for operating on or in the vicinity of an airport in Class G airspace. And that's where, you know, one of the, if you're in the traffic pattern, all turns should be made to the left unless some other indication and all of that. So what I'm really getting at is don't treat every airport the same, you know, and if you don't have your own farmer's field airport, don't treat every other airport as if you're the person that owns it, because it's a shared resource between you and all the other pilots that are out there. And, you know, if you're at the busy tower controlled airport, don't be surprised that everyone isn't doing a 4-mile final. You know, if you learn to fly there at a busy tower controlled airport and you're at a non-towered airport, you know, you might be surprised. People may be keeping it in closer or taking a little bit further apart. And even if you're familiar with ATC all the time, going to a non-towered airport, there definitely are a lot of NORDO, you know, no radio aircraft that are out there. And then above and beyond that, there sure are a whole lot of exceptions to the regulations that may be associated with operations in the traffic pattern. You know, there's, of course, 91-111 is the regulation that talks about you can't operate so close to another aircraft to create a collision hazard. And then 91-113 is right-of-way rules, you know, and who has the right-of-way? You know, gliders tend to have the right-of-way over powered aircraft other than a powered aircraft in distress. And that's something you need to be giving consideration to. And then if you fly helicopters or powered parachute, you know, 91-126 and other regulations is each pilot of a helicopter or powered parachute must avoid the flow of fixed wing aircraft. Regulation doesn't say anything about gyrocopters, but I do know most gyrocopters operate that way. And if you operate ultralights, believe it or not, the ultralight regulations even have regulations associated with that. Is FAR 103.13 says, ultralights must yield the right of way to all aircraft, and then powered ultralights shall yield to unpowered ultralights. And, it might be new to you, but it's not new to us in the FAA entirely, is we even have regulations now about drones. If you take a look at the small UAS part 107 regulations, there is a regulation in there that says each small unmanned aircraft must yield the right of way to all aircraft, airborne vehicles, which are ultralights, and launch and re-entry vehicles. So, they have to get out of everybody's way in traffic pattern operations. And there's been some changes recently. We'll talk a little bit later about the drone rules and why you might end up seeing them operating closer to airports than you may have thought in the past. Dan, and I'm going to bring it up again, you have a few airports that have changed operations in your district recently. So things are kind of changing with traffic patterns at a few of your local airports?
Yes, Stephen. So, of course, the one that comes to mind is Northampton, Massachusetts. They have glider operations now, and the airport folks are working on getting the glider symbol on the chart to have it depicted. It's not yet, but they've put the request in. And, of course, we have North Adams, Danielson, and Sterling, which is right between the two areas between the Boston FAASTeam and the Hartford FAASTeam. And also, a lot of these airports also have parachute operations as well. And so there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good thing to check the charts for that. I know we were talking yesterday. We had a near close call with the Skydive Center with parachutists in an aircraft flying right over the airport recently here in the Boston FAASTeam area. We don't ever want to repeat any of the accidents that have occurred in the past between skydivers and aircraft.
Yeah.
And, we also can see some other influences on traffic patterns, typically noise abatement type things associated with airport. One that is interesting, and this is part of the pamphlet that is sent out to all the flight schools, available in the terminal building, so forth and so on. And unusual is that a national park is located right next to the airport. So as a result, they have this pamphlet out there, but compared to what you may see at some other locations, if you're doing traffic pattern operations at this tower controlled airport, they may actually ask you to keep it in closer to the runway than you normally would because of the national park. And there's so many different influences out there on how you may fly a traffic pattern. And that brings about, if we try to break it down into its simplest terms. And this is probably the biggest thing that I want to get across to you about how you may be operating in traffic patterns is, first and foremost, when you're doing something, think about it, is it safe? The second thing, is it legal? And purposely have that as legal, even though I'm an FAA person, have legal as the second item, because there are things that are legal that not all of us would consider safe in terms of our operations. How many of us are comfortable flying VFR in 3.5 or even sometimes 4 miles visibility, or in Class Gulf airspace in 1.5 mile visibility? Technically legal, but many of us may not qualify that into the safe category. And then last but not least is it courteous? Are you being courteous to the other pilots in your area? And I put this picture up there because what it is we don't want you to be that guy. We don't want you to be the guy that the other pilots at your local airport are disenchanted with because maybe you're a bit too pushy, not courteous in the traffic pattern. Don't want to be that guy that goes to another airport and forces, things that are different on how you're operating at that airport. You don't want to be that guy that's known for always doing the long straight in finals and maybe kind of cutting people off in the traffic pattern. We want you to be a courteous, safe, and legal pilot. We don't want you to be that guy. Now, a lot of things that we're hitting upon today, and even more than that, is this advisory circular. It's available in the handouts, 90-66 Bravo, and it has change one that has come out in it. And it is a fairly recent update, and terrific update too, I do think, is, it opened up a bit more opportunity, talked a little bit about how things may be adjusted for different types of aircraft conditions, what's going on and stuff. I know when the draft of this came out, myself and some of the safety reps in the Boston area got together and submitted some comments to it. And I know some of those comments actually you can find directly in this advisory circular. So you do want to download this and take a look. And flying a precise traffic pattern also means being a precise pilot. And one of the first things, you probably want to do to make sure that you can fly a traffic pattern precisely is making sure that you know and understand that your aircraft can perform in and out of that airport. We all have some smaller airports in our district. In the past, for Boston, it used to be Marlborough. I hate to say lately, it's probably been a bit more Cranland since Marlborough is closed, where people probably are going into and out of the airports in aircraft that they really should not be, at weight conditions that they really should not be, weather conditions that they really should not be, and as a result, are ending up with some bent aluminum, and we don't want that. We don't want the bent aluminum. We don't want hurt people. So it's probably a good thing. Sit down and take a look at your performance, and take a look at your performance at maximum weight and also mission weight. Take a look at it in the hot summertime versus the cooler winter time, and try to get a baseline of what that performance is under given circumstances, like in no wind conditions. And one of the important things, which we'll talk about here in a second, is rotation speed, or specifically 70% speed. And this is something that we've figured out when you do the takeoff calculations, is that 70% can be very important. And also, as we're here in the middle of summer, density altitude plays a big, big factor. Here in New England, you're not going to find very many airports above 1,500 feet above sea level. They're so few and far between. But you can find an airport near 1,500 feet and also find it, such as we had this past week, close to 100 degrees, which, give you density altitudes up in the 4,000 or 5,000 foot range. That the density altitude for the middle of summer can be pretty darn dramatic if you're not thinking about it. And, think about this, is if you're in a fixed pitch propeller for every 1,000 feet of density altitude, think about it being the equivalent of about a 15% increase in your takeoff roll. Constant speed, we're talking about 12%, and that 70% of your takeoff speed that I had mentioned comes in a good way, is the thumb to use is if you're taking off from a runway and you don't have obstructions to clear at the end, which for New England is kind of few and far between, but at least this is a good starting point, is at 50% down the runway, you need to be at least 70% of your rotation speed in order to lift off on that airport. So take, for example, if you got a rotation speed of 60 miles per hour or 60 knots, 70% of that is 42. So at the halfway point, you need to be at least 42 miles per hour or knots, whatever you have in your particular aircraft. And that is a very, very important kind of quick check rule of thumb that you can use to help yourself out. If you're at 50% and only 50% of the rotation speed, and you decide not to stop, you're going to go off the end. And, you know, we're not going to get into the detailed math on that, but it is available and out there. It's not going to be a good outcome. If you have an obstruction to clear at about a way or 30% of the runway, you want to be at that 70% of your liftoff speed. And, you know, smaller airports that are set back a little bit, you're starting to see these halfway signs being put out there. This is from one airport in New Hampshire that I'm familiar with. I know there's a few of them around New Hampshire that now have these signs, but halfway down the runway is this halfway sign, so that you can check your speed, as we just talked about, that you're at least 70% of your liftoff speed. Also, this is a terrific thing to check. We normally want you to touch down in the first third of the runway, but if you don't, at the halfway mark, you better be doing a go around. You know, don't try to put it on the runway after the halfway mark, because that's where we always end up picking up the aircraft that are now missing the nose wheel. You know, only have 2 out of 3 gear legs left. One got ripped off the wing, whatever it may end up being. So that's another good way, is taking off. You need to be 70% is your liftoff speed at least. And on landing, you better be already on the ground by that point in time and starting to brake to a stop. Is just don't push it. Also in the handouts is a safety pamphlet on density altitude, and in there is what's known here as the FAA Koch Chart. But this is a good round chart, especially for the older kind of antique type aircraft, say Luscombes, you know, that have the very, very small manuals or whatever, or the aircraft that may only give you takeoff conditions at standard sea level. Is you can take a look, if you know what your standard sea level takeoff performance is and climb performance, you can cross-reference the pressure altitude of your airport to an outside air temperature, and can tell you, take for example, this red line is left over from me working with somebody on this chart to show them, but just pressure altitude, not even 500 feet above sea level, but a warm, warm summer day of 90 degrees, you can see, you're going to see basically about a 20% decrease in your rate of climb. So if you climb normally at 500 feet per minute, you're only going to be 400 feet per minute. And it's going to increase your takeoff distance 1,500 feet to take off. You're going to be at almost close to 2,000 foot long takeoff. And you start at higher altitude, of course, and go to the high temperatures, like down in the desert Southwest. As you can see on this black line here, it can be very, very astronomical. You know, you can have 260% plus increases in your takeoff distance. It also talks about another rule of thumb for increase for every 10 degrees increase in Fahrenheit. It basically is pretty darn close to a 700 foot increase in density altitude when you're talking about lower altitudes of 8,000 feet and below. Now, in the traffic pattern, one of the things that we do have to bring up is collision avoidance, because this is where aircraft tend to congregate, you know, and aircraft of different types and also at certain times of the day. And if we take a look, we have all had to deal with and seen a few mid-air accidents in each of our districts. And occasionally there are ones that it only ends up in bent metal, bent aluminum, but more so than often, you know, they have tragic consequences to us. But if we look at mid-air collisions, what we have found is they almost all tend to occur at or near non-towered airports. They almost all occur during daylight. They almost all occur in good visibility, and almost all occur at 1,000 feet or below. AGL, and almost all actually, believe it or not, involve aircraft traveling in the same direction. And if we look at the distribution in the traffic pattern, you can see a lot of them occur on the runway and also occur on final. And I don't know, I know I've had to deal with a few of them in my time with the FAA, right? In each of your districts, you guys have had to deal with some mid-air collisions, correct?
Yeah, we've had some, Steve, and you're right. I mean, the criteria that you put out there, you know, near the non-towered airports, daylight to good visibility below 1,000 feet. Boy, that's right on the money. I mean, any that I've had to deal with, that's been the case. When I was doing my initial flight training many moons ago, there was a nearby airport where there was a collision with an aircraft that was making a descending right turn to enter a left downwind, and another aircraft that had just departed and was making a left turn off the upwind leg out of the traffic pattern, and the two came together. And you know, that falls right in line with what you just stated right there. You know, right there in the traffic pattern it happened.
Yeah, and I've been involved with collegiate aviation programs, and I know firsthand I've dealt with 3 different ones. Almost all 3 of them occurred right on the final. One was because they believe a student was doing a right-hand traffic pattern. In that case, the student survived, but the pilot of the other aircraft did not. I know I had worked with an instructor that we lost with his student that collided with another aircraft on final. And then same thing as an aircraft on final collided with another training aircraft on a VOR approach, you know. All very close to the airport, all within just a couple miles of it while flying. And that's why you got to look, talk, and listen in the traffic pattern. So how is it that you can help avoid being one of those statistics? One is be predictable. And this is part of what we're talking about here, is flying the published patterns for that specific airport, and use the standard entry and exit procedures. You know, that's what's available in the advisory circular. So please download that. Be aware, look and listen for traffic. You know, even if you are one of those types that you don't like to get flight following, it may be beneficial as you approach an airport to approach frequency or the departure arrival air traffic control frequency for that area, just so that you get a little bit of an understanding of what may be going into and out of that airport. You know, and being proactive is announcing your position and intention so that everybody else knows what you're doing. That falls in with, you know, be that courteous pilot. Now, a few other things, terrific devices. I enjoy it. I use, you know, a Stratus device myself when I'm flying, but do recognize not all aircraft are equipped ADS-B out. Here in the Boston area, people tend to think that, you know, we have the Mode C veil. Most of the area is covered by it, but there also are exceptions to the Mode C and the ADS-B rule. There's gliders that are exempt from the Mode C and the ADS-B rule, as we talked about, operating into and out of Sterling. And we also have a lot of older antique aircraft, things like some of the Champs and the Piper Cubs. You know, one of the exceptions to that rule is if an aircraft does not have an engine-driven electrical system and subsequently has not been fitted with one, they still can operate in certain types of airspace without a transponder, without ADS-B out information. So they just don't show up, you know, on ADS-B or the FISB traffic, FISB traffic, excuse me, that you might end up seeing in your glass panel, on your iPad, whatever it may be. Even though you're still in ADS-B out required airspace, there are some exceptions. So it's so important to recognize the limitations of any traffic information that you're using and how important it is to keep your eyeballs looking out and listen for the traffic. So, so important. Hey, one more thing. I told you they'd come back, but now we're really sharing the airspace with, millions of drones and out there, and they all should be operating below 400 feet AGL. In areas that we have controlled airspace to the surface, like controlled airspace to the surface, class Echo, like we have up in Concord, New Hampshire, class Delta, such as we have in Groton, Worcester, Beverly, Nashua, in class Charlie airspace, and also class Bravo. There is what's known as a LANT system. That's Lima Alpha Alpha November Charlie system that restricts them and allows certain commercial operations to occur, up to 400 feet AGL as you get in closer to those airports. But the airports that are located in class Gulf airspace, take like Stowe Minuteman, Keene, New Hampshire, out there, Fitchburg, North Adams, is class G airspace. The rule changed back a few years ago that, hey, commercial drone operations can occur, in class Gulf airspace as long as they're below 400 feet AGL and avoid, all other aerial traffic, ultralights, airplanes, so forth and so on. And, it's still being worked out a little bit for the hobbyists, but it is out there, pretty much the same thing for them too. So compared to what you may see a few years ago, you could have drones operating much closer to the traffic pattern than you've seen in the past. They still need to be outside of the pattern by regulation. They're required to stay out of the traffic pattern and avoid, all other aerial vehicles. But you got to also remember, it can be very, very difficult if somebody's not following the rules properly to spot in time to maneuver for collision avoidance. And what should you see, or what should you do if you happen to see somebody at your airport? You may want to politely, courteously talk to them and maybe let them know that it may not be the best type of operation for it. Or, if you don't have that, but it's a reoccurring theme or something like that, you can always call the FAASTO with it and talk to someone in the FAASTO, local FAA office about it. And what's great is on the FAASTeam, all of us as FAASTeam program managers, we have some terrific experts out there called the Drone Pros. You want to talk about the Drone Pros a little bit, Dan?
Yeah, Stephen. So, the Drone Pros is kind of a new thing that we have. They're reps that are subject matter experts on UAS, and it's something that recently added to the FAASTeam. It's becoming a larger part of our job. And like Stephen said, we do have some terrific folks. I know throughout the New England FAASTeam area, for the Bradley FAASTO, Boston, Portland, we have some great folks. In our area, we have a writer and editor for a major aviation magazine. We have a professor at one of the local universities. Stephen, I know up in your area, you have actually folks that are actually working in the UAS industry. Is that right? And,
sorry about that. I had myself on mute. Yeah, actually, a couple of our Drone Pros, we got 3 of them now in the Boston area, but 2 of them do a lot of work for the state of Massachusetts. And
yes,
basically, that's a big, big part of their careers is operating as UAS operators. And boy, they know it better than I do, way, way better than I do. So they're a terrific resource.
Yeah. So if you see someone that's, at your airport and maybe you feel uncomfortable, you don't want to confront them or anything, and maybe you don't want to go to the route going to the FAASTO, you can either contact one of the FAASTeam folks, and we can reach out to these drone pros that volunteer their time to do education outreach for drone pilots. Or you can go on the website and just type in Drone Pro, and you can see the folks in your area if you'd like to contact them directly. Like I said, they're volunteers. They don't get paid. It's something they do out of the goodness of their heart to help educate folks. Very low profile type thing. It's not. Sometimes it's a little different than if the FAA actually calls them, and they're calls someone, and they're very happy to do that. So it's definitely a resource for folks.
Yeah, a great resource that we do have, and you can find them if you go on FAASAFETY.GOV and you're looking under the resources, you know, for safety reps or that sort of things. If you just type in the word drone and pros all together as one, drone pros, it should be able to bring the ones up in your local area. Now, part of being courteous in the traffic pattern, you know, it actually is helpful, because I do know some small UAS operators that occasionally have to work near an airport, and they're usually monitoring the common traffic advisory frequency for that airport, just to help them understand who's coming around or coming in for landing or taking off at that airport. But the radio calls is, if you look at the Aeronautical Information Manual, here's what we have as the recommended radio calls as you're proceeding inbound and also outbound, for that matter, at a non-towered airport. As you're inbound, you probably want to call about 10 miles out, let people know that you are coming in. When you're entering the downwind, when you're turning the base, turning the final, and when you've cleared the runway or leaving the runway, because that's important for, you know, a person that may be following you to know, or is there someone that's, you know, holding short, waiting for you to clear the runway, wanting to take off. Also, I'm going to call before taxiing, and also call just as you're taking off, before taxiing out onto the runway and taking off on that runway, is when you want to make those radio calls. You know, and the before taxiing one is just to help people understand, hey, there's somebody heading out towards the runway, but also it can help you avoid those situations where more than one aircraft may be trying to use a taxiway in opposite directions at different times. Yeah. If you talk to a lot of instructors, here's what you'll probably hear from them, maybe a little bit more with it. But departing from the active runway, you probably want to tell them if you're leaving the pattern or if you're staying within the traffic pattern for closed traffic. Turning the crosswind if you're staying within it. Turning the downwind. You'll notice the asterisk is what is the recommended radio call procedure out of the airplane flying handbook. Turning the base, as we've mentioned, the final. Sometimes it's also good to let people know if you're planning a full stop, touch and go, or maybe even at some longer runways, a stop and go. Entering the traffic pattern, 10 miles out. You know, and that's what we see as recommendations in the airplane flying handbook and aeronautical information manual. You look in the advisory circular, you probably see a little bit more talking about that, is trying to help people that are also in the traffic pattern with you to be able to see you and recognize you if you're making radio calls as another aircraft. I give as an example here, you know, we'll use Dubois Regional, and Dan and I will debate. That's, you know, if you're from Pennsylvania, it's pronounced one way. If you're not from Pennsylvania, it's pronounced another. Just like I can say the Boston accent.
The correct pronunciation, as someone who lives in Pennsylvania or lived in Pennsylvania, it's Du Bois. But then again, I also, my first night at Worcester, I told everyone, I'm happy to be here at Worcester. So I've struggled with the Massachusetts pronunciations. Worcester. Oh, Worcester. I still didn't even get it right. So, but yeah, it's Du Bois.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you could tell I live near the Canadian border. You know, I have take under that. But yeah, here's an example. I'll use, this is me, myself. This is how I will make typical radio calls when I'm flying. And many of you know that I fly gliders a lot too. But, you know, like Dubois Regional Traffic, white glider, Tango Hotel, entering left downwind runway 25, Dubois Regional. Now, a few things that you may have heard in there. One is using the airport name as it shows on the charts versus the town. That definitely helps with it. And that's what I would encourage you to use is what do you see on the sectional chart for the name of the airport? That's what you probably should be using. And like the Aeronautical Information Manual recommends, using it both at the beginning of your statement and at the end of it. You know, instead of knowing the type of aircraft definitely does help. You know, like Cessna, you can assume is a high wing type of aircraft, but not everything. You know, if I was flying an Eagle 150, you know, most people would be like, I don't know what that is. But if I said triplane, you know, that would help clarify it a little bit more to some other people out there. Also, you heard me use Tango Hotel versus the N number of the aircraft. And that's specifically because a lot of gliders have a competition number, and that's what the competition number of my glider is. And it's on the tail in big 24-inch letters. That's much easier for you as another pilot to see or start to pick out. You'll still end up pretty close to me if you're seeing it, but it's definitely a lot easier to see that in 24-inch letters than it is to see the little 3-inch letter N number on the tail boom of the aircraft. Giving the color of the aircraft also helps out. Some other things that you might see, this is just kind of particular to gliders. You know, the recommendation is 10 miles out. If you're flying at an airport that has glider operations at it, it's not unusual to hear them, instead of give mileage out, time that they're out. Because depending upon the day and the conditions and even the type of glider, you know, they can be 10 minutes out, 15 miles from the airport, or they can be 5 miles from the airport and still be 45 minutes out. It all depends upon what that pilot is trying to do that day. You know, if maybe it's competition type style flying versus just enjoying a flight in the local area. Also, it depends upon how fast the glider might be capable of flying, what altitude it's at already, and things like that. So it's probably more common if you're operating in an airport that has glider operations at it to hear that distance be, excuse me, in terms of time versus mileage. If you're departing the traffic pattern, blasting off, believe it or not, this picture is of a home built by one of our retired FAA folks, and has an awesome paint job on it, as you can tell. But if you're flying in the traffic pattern and you're going to stay within the traffic pattern, what you want to do is turn your crosswind beyond the departure end of the runway and within 300 feet of the traffic pattern altitude. You know, so if 100 feet AGL before making your turn to the crosswind. You know, if you have a rocket ship that you get to traffic pattern altitude before the departure end of the runway, you know, level off and wait until you're at the departure end of the runway before you make the turn. Do recognize too that 1,000 feet is the standard traffic pattern altitude, but that's not the case for all aircraft. More commonly, turbine-powered aircraft, if they're in the traffic pattern. I used to do a lot of check rides in Eclipse jets, and we'd have to do a pattern or two to finish off everything on a type rating ride. They fly at 1,500 feet AGL. If you're departing the traffic pattern, you want to continue straight out, or as you get to the departure end of the runway and after reaching the pattern altitude, turn 45 degrees in the pattern direction. So if it's a left-hand traffic pattern, a left-hand turn. If it's one of those atypical right-hand traffic patterns, is making a 45-degree right-hand turn. And then I recommend make sure you're at least 500 feet above any of the traffic pattern altitudes for that airport before you start making your turns on course, also assuring that you're clear of the traffic pattern. And why does it help to talk? It's not a requirement, but it definitely does help. And this is only going to look at about 15 seconds of this short video clip, but this is exactly why. is we don't want you to ever end up facing this type of circumstance.
This footage was recently shared with me, and I think it illustrates the importance of flying with cameras for debrief purposes.
And that's why is we don't ever want you to be in that situation. You know, is fitting in with the flow of traffic and traffic patterns helps everybody else know where you are, where you're going to be, what's going on, and it helps, you know, for you to talk if you have that capability. Now, not all traffic patterns are left-hand traffic patterns, and I get asked this question all the time, is on the charts, you might end up seeing this RP.
Hey, Steve, I'm still seeing the stop screen, Runway Precision screen.
Yeah, me too.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's, there we are. Excellent.
There we are.
I'll go back one just to take a look. There is the website address if you do want it, but talking about right-hand traffic patterns is, you can see a lot of times people will ask me about what this RP stands for. You know, RP runway 19. That tells us that it's a right-hand traffic pattern with right-hand turns, which is different from what is it, 91-126, if I recall, says. But if you're landing runway 19 at this airport, you'd come in, enter in on the 45 degree, enter your downwind, your base, and your final with right-hand turns. And then for runway 1, be left-hand traffic, you'd come in, enter the downwind, base leg, and the final. With that, a lot of times people will ask questions. You'll see this asterisk RP, and that doesn't mean that all runways are right-hand traffic pattern. What it means is that there are some operations that will require right-hand traffic pattern operations, and you need to look at the chart supplement or the airport facilities directory to find out what they are. For this, Bend, Oregon is the example here, but it's a right-hand pattern for fixed-wing aircraft to remain west of runway using runway right pattern runway 16 and left pattern for runway 34. So all fixed-wing aircraft, airplanes, and gliders will be over on this side of the airport, and rotor wing to remain east of the runway and use a right-hand pattern for runway 34 and a left-hand pattern for runway 16. So you basically got your gliders and airplanes over here, and then over on this side is where you'll have your rotorcraft. And that's what the star RP means at that particular airport. You have to look for it. Now, the classic entry that we normally talk about, and this is kind of the set standard, although it's not an absolute standard that we'll talk about, is joining on a 45 to the traffic pattern for whatever direction it may be. Left-hand turns are standard, such as you see right here, so that you would come in, enter in on a 45, giving way to traffic that is already established in the traffic pattern. But some other options that you might have available to you, I've used this one a bit over the years, is cross over and above any and all traffic pattern altitudes. You know, normally 1,000 feet, but there may be a 1,500 feet or some other height traffic pattern. You know, make sure you're clear of all traffic. The good estimate is at least 2 miles apart. Then you can go ahead and descend your turn to turn on to the 45 degree. And if you look at the advisory circular, it also says, oh, you could go ahead and enter in on the angle here, keeping in line with the 91-126 regulation of all turns to the left in the traffic pattern. And those are some of the different options. These are options for the United States, I will admit. If you do have the opportunity to fly in Canada or other countries, they may be different. So don't expect that what we do here in the US is used in all other countries. Now, we get asked about this a lot. And, you know, to begin with, I have to say, you always have to go back to, is it safe? is it legal, and is it courteous? But everybody always asks about straight-in approaches, you know, and by regulation, an aircraft established on the way, regardless of who's IFR or VFR, you know, and by definition, the final approach has no distance limit. But there also have been cases that have looked at this and made some determinations. I know flight crews that have gotten in trouble for establishing 4-mile finals and what impact that it has on other aircraft. You know, if the advisory circular 9066 gives some suggestions, and, you know, just remember, everybody is responsible for the see and avoid. Now, a few things to also think about if you're in the pattern is have your lights on, you know, looking visually. You know, if somebody is coming in on a long straight in and you're in the traffic pattern, you know, you may not cut them off, but correspondingly also, if they're 10 miles out calling a straight in, you know, and you have the time and can get on the ground and clear, you may be able to do that. You know, it all depends. How close is the traffic? How fast is it going? Always do consider extending your downwind. And if you're that person that's flying a straight in approach, lights on to help others see you. Make sure you're coordinating on the common traffic advisory. Be aware there's no Nordo aircraft out there. And, you know, don't create a conflict. It is be courteous to your fellow pilots. So think about it this way. Is it your own private airport? If it is, you know, go have fun. You know, it's you yourself, your airport, all the power to you. But if you're flying somewhere where there's a chance that there's others in the traffic pattern, you want to join the standard flow because that's where they're going to expect to see you. Is there a like? If there are, you need to join the traffic pattern because you're really just setting it up. And that brings us right back. I've said it once, and I'll say it again. Is it safe? Is it legal? And last but not least, is it courteous? We don't want you to be that guy in the traffic pattern. You know, flying a standard traffic pattern, there's kind of a few decision points you want to think about, what we call the key positions. And these are used in different things that we may end up doing. But these are the points where you want to ask yourself, am I high, am I low, am I fast, am I slow? And, you know, a stable approach leads to a good landing, is being on speed, on path, on course, you know, using available resources such as FAASIs that you don't see so much, aiming point in relation to that, you know, so that it all looks right for you. Now, you're seeing FAASIs disappear, and the other things like the old alignment of elements or the tricolor FAASIs or the pulsating FAASIs, they're basically all but gone now. In the last couple of years, the last few that I knew of, say Middletown, Ohio, Front Royal, Virginia and stuff, they've all gone away. But a lot of places now you're seeing the PAPI lights, especially if there's a precision approach installed on it. And what can also be very beneficial, it comes out of this advisory circular. It's in the appendices and you can see it, but it can also be very beneficial to learn and know about the different runway markings and also how big they are. Like the runway aiming point markings, which are 1,000 feet down the runway, are 150 feet long. Other touchdown zone markings are 75 feet long that you'll see. And probably most important is to think about the runway stripes, because this can help you figure out the distance very easily. Runway stripes are 120 feet long with 80 feet in between them. So if we take a look at some following pictures here, you know, if you ever go down to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, you know, you take a look and you start to figure out how far down the runway different things are, 500 feet, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 1,000 feet. aiming point markings coming the other direction. And, you know, you take a look at this picture, you also can see the beginning of one runway stripe to the beginning of the next runway stripe is 200 feet. So let's just say you want to land 1,500 feet down the runway. Okay, well, right about there is the runway aiming point markings, which are 1,000 feet. That's right about the end of that runway stripe. So I go to the next one, and that's the next end of a runway stripe. That's 200 feet, another 200 feet, and then just a little bit more. And, you know, you can figure it out pretty darn quick and easy. And that can help you with figuring out where you should be planning the touchdown, and maybe even using that well-appointed bug splatter on your windshield as to help you keep the aiming point. But you take a look at your landing distance, and this is an example, you know, for a PA-28-161, and this is at absolute minimum weight. You know, it says, okay, you're going to need 860 feet over a 50-foot obstacle under these given conditions. But, you know, how many people are comfortable in a Warrior touching down at like, or flying in approach speed, excuse me, at like 52 knots or so and touching down at 38? Most are not. So most people, when they do the calculations and think about it, they're thinking closer to maximum weight with speeds closer to this, the 65 and 45. And you can see the distance increases significantly to 1,220 feet. And, you know, you start taking a look, and that's to clear a 50-foot obstacle, but not all airports have that. This airport that we've had issues with in the past, you know, it tells you, hey, there's 72-foot tall trees right on the final, right up close to the runway. And that's probably more typical for New England, is much more than 50-foot, the classic 50-foot tall trees. But you can do a little bit of geometry and start to figure out how far down the runway you should plan your touchdown point, and then use those runway markings to figure it out. So in this case here, we know 1,220 feet, and another part of the book tells us the ground roll will be 600 feet. So all we have to do is subtract that 600 from 1,220 there. And in this particular scenario, in short field performance for that particular aircraft, it's about a little bit over 600 feet. For most general aviation aircraft, you'll see it's closer to 800 to 850. And you can also use that to figure out, well, what if I got a taller obstacle, like that 72-foot tree sent on clearing at 100 feet? If it's up here, you can start to say, well, that obstacle is 100 feet now. I know the ground roll was 600, it was 600. And guess what? Basic trigonometry is that is 600 feet also. In this scenario here, you should plan on it being a total of 1,800 feet total at least, and 1,200 feet beyond that 100-foot tall tree as to where you are touching down. And if you are curious, the classic 3-degree glide slope, you know, if you're clearing a 50-foot obstacle at the threshold, you're touching down at about 900, 6,000 feet down the runway. And if you're at AGL on P about 1.6 nautical miles from the touchdown point, or about 1.5 miles off the end of the runway, that is 19-to-1, you know, and at best, most GA aircraft are about 8, 9, or 10-to-1 glide ratio. You know, it just is no way you're ever going to make it, you know, if you're out that far at that altitude trying to fly a 3-degree glide slope. Most GA aircraft are closer to a 4-degree glide slope, which clearing a 50-foot obstacle over the threshold, or being 50 feet over the threshold, will put you down on the ground about just over 715 feet down the runway is where your touchdown point should be. And then about 1.2 nautical miles out, or 1.1 miles out if you're at 500 feet AGL. And that requires a 14-to-1 glide ratio. It's also good to take a look and point out the highest obstacle on the final. That way you know where it is and can avoid it. It's something I always have done with students for years, is just to get them looking at more than just concentrating on the runway, but to have an awareness of what's around them and try to improve their safety. Also, you want to be wary of the chop and drop style of landing. Clearing an obstacle is so many times we end up kicking up bent metal. Now with traffic patterns, an issue we are dealing with now, and it's becoming more, is wrong runway alignment. For example, here in Boston at Bedford-Hanscom, we've had 10 or more in just the past year. Some are really minor, but some of them are a bit scary. You know, and at Bedford-Hanscom, we typically have the traffic being fed in from Boston Approach up on the north side, with kind of the typical runway in use being runway 29, especially in the winter months, fall, winter, spring. You know, and we end up having examples like this all the time, where aircraft is coming in from the north, you know, are told to land on runway 29. This is the airport down here, but they end up crossing by and they see runway 23 and they start going for it, you know, and that's just not a safe circumstance. We've had a few close calls with this, you know, and if you take a look, this is a diagram, Bedford-Hanscom here in the middle. You know, it's out here on the final on the crossing runways, runway 5 and 23 is where we've had most of these. This is, again, just for Bedford-Hanscom, but 7 out of the 10 were on visual approach. 8 of the 10 were involving runway 23, runway 29 issues. It has been so much of an issue that we have issued a letter to airmen out there, which is available if you look under NOTAMs. Also, we issued a FAASTeam safety notice on it. But the big thing is take some of these tips and use them in any type of flying that you do at an airport that has more than one runway. If there's an ILS available to it, use it as a backup. You know, do be careful of, at some point as you pass by the localizer antenna, you're going to see maybe the flip of the needle, especially in older style equipment. Be wary of that. If there's a VOR located nearby and it's on a certain radial, you can always line that up, and many times it may align with a final approach course to a specific runway. We have so many RNAV GPS approaches out there that are dead on the center. You know, if you're an instrument pilot, why not just load in the RNAV approach? You know, have GPS, you're just a VFR type of pilot. Well, put in the destination airport and then use the OBS mode and line it up on your course 2 for the final approach that you want to land on. That'll help indicate to you. If you're using electronic flight bag, why not use the traffic pattern feature, which we'll talk about a little bit here, or the extended centerline feature to help you visualize the setup for the runway. You know, and I use ForeFlight myself all the time, but here's just an example. You know, in your flight plan or under arrival procedures you have for the visual, you can pull this up and add it right to your route. And in this case here, going to this airport for my route of flight, says, yeah, your best entry is the 45-degree entry to the downwind for runway 27. You know, and it adds it right into your flight plan, just like you see right here, and also plots it out on your course for you and makes it real easy. You have this visual depiction of it, but also if you have on the extended center line, such as you see here, it'll help tell you where you are and helping you assure that you are lining up for the correct runway. You know, I used to do this with, if you're still using paper charts, but this is what I used to do with my students with the paper charts, is if they were planning across country, I'd have them draw a dashed line 45 degrees off from the runway in the direction of the traffic pattern, and then go out 4 or 5 miles and try to find a good visual checkpoint that they could fly to, such as in this case here at the Claremont County Airport, going to Amelia, Ohio, this town on what's known as Route 25 or 125, if I recall correctly. And then for runway 4 is up here where river and major interstate end up intersecting. And if they're coming in from, far away, but they listen to the ASOS or, hear traffic or using runway 22, instead of going right to the airport, they can adjust their course at the end, fly down to this waypoint, and then once they're over it, all they have to do is fly directly at the airport, and we'll put them on almost a perfect 45-degree entry. So that's another little tip or trick that you can use if you're using paper charts to help you understand. Dan, we were talking yesterday about some of these tips and tricks, and formerly flying airline-wise, wasn't it a requirement to tune up the ILS, if I recall? I know it was
yes,
where I was. How about for you?
Yeah, you always want to use all available resources and back yourself up. Folks that fly for a living, even on a clear, beautiful night, they'll do that. And I mean, most of my flying wasn't really airline flying. I did some airline flying, but most of my flying was Part 135 in a Cessna Caravan, flying night cargo. And you'd be amazed flying the same route every night is still, you want to back yourself up because it can happen to the best of us. And I love your idea of the, if you're flying into a small airport that doesn't have an approach, just to select that as your final waypoint and then use the OBS mode just to set for your runway. And, it's amazing, professional pilots not only land on wrong runways, but wrong airports. So it can happen.
Yes, it can. It can. Yeah.
It
is.
That was a regular occurrence down at Brainerd Airport. They'd always land over at Rensselaer.
Yeah.
You took it out first.
Yeah. And, Bedford and other airports that have this occurring have tried to do their best to help you out. They're putting information on the ATIS, so it fits in with that think about all available resources. And it's become such a big issue around the nation, but Bedford-Hanscom is where we probably see it the most, but in New England, in all 3 districts. But the FAA has come up with a series called From the Flight Deck. And what they have done is produce some short videos about 3 minutes long for different airports. And here in the New England area, one of the very first ones they did, both in New England and around the country, was Bedford-Hanscom because of this issue. And you can find this if you just go on FAA.gov or Google search From the Flight Deck, you can find it. Here's the YouTube page for it. But I'm just going to go ahead towards the end here and show that video to you.
Each airport in the National Airspace System has unique and distinct characteristics, which can sometimes lead pilots to use the wrong surface in taxi, takeoff, or landing operations. Let's take a look at some of these tricky areas from the flight deck. Lawrence G. Hanscom Field in Bedford, Massachusetts, is located 15 miles northwest of Boston Logan Airport, between the towns of Concord and Lexington. It's a medium-sized airport serving primarily the corporate, business, and general aviation communities. The airport configuration consists of 2 intersecting runways, 523 and 1129. The runway layout at the airport has led to some unique issues involving proper runway identification. Aircraft either on a wide right base or on a right downwind, or runway 29, have mistakenly approached and attempted to land on runway 23. Misidentification of a runway often occurs if the other runway comes into sight first. In this example, the pilot sees runway 23 before runway 29, but does not verify that it is the correct runway. The same misidentification occurs with aircraft on the right base to runway 11, in this case, inadvertently lining up for runway 5. Positive identification of the landing runway needs to be a part of every pilot's landing checklist. Hotspot 1, depicted on the airport diagram, highlights an area that is hazardous due to its complexity. The intersections of taxiways Sierra, Juliet, Foxtrot, Gulf, and Echo, combined with a large ramp area, creates a prime area for confusion and misidentification. Understanding your taxi clearance and aircraft location on the airport is an absolute requirement when transitioning through this area. Pilots need to remember that if they are ever in doubt or unsure of any instruction or aircraft position, the easiest answer is to ask the Air Traffic Control Tower. They're there to help. Being aware of hotspots and other configuration issues at Lawrence G. Hanscom Field will help pilots make better decisions and, along with the Air Traffic Control Tower, keep the operation safe and efficient. Now you're better prepared for your trip to Lawrence G. Hanscom Airport. It's always better to know before you go.
Terrific. So that's a short little video series that is out there, and more airports are being added to it. So you probably want to take the opportunity to see what airports are out there, some that may end up being in your local area, all of that. But Bedford-Hanscom is probably the airport where we're having the largest issue with people lining up on the wrong runway here in the New England area. But it is happening in all of the districts. You know, you've had it up in Burlington, Vermont, I believe, John. And Dan, I don't know where you guys have experienced it.
Yeah, that runway configuration up in Burlington, Vermont, with runway 15 and 19 can be challenging, and we have had a number of wrong runway departures and wrong runway landings up there.
Stephen, for us, it's Hartford.
Is it?
Yeah, Bradley. And they put in a new system. I went to the RSAT recently online, and they put in a new system that automatically alerts the controllers if pilots don't line up on the right runway, and it's working. That seems to help, but yeah, it's definitely an issue for us there.
Yeah, they can take airports that have ASDX information. They can take that information along with ADSB information and combine it together and basically provide a warning setup. And we have it at Boston Logan. Just one or two runways don't have it because it's so close to another runway.
Right.
So most of Logan is covered, but not all of it.
Sometimes, if there's a strong crosswind, a pilot may feel like they're lined up, but they're actually kind of getting blown off, and it'll sometimes give a false alert, even though the pilot knows where they're going. They're just getting blown off. But yeah, it's caught a couple, and sometimes, like I was saying, it could be professional flight crews, and sometimes it's general aviation folks as well.
Yeah. Well, as we finish off here, folks, just want to point out to you and why it's so important, to fly a standardized pattern, to be doing it legally, be doing it safe, and also be doing it with courtesy to, your fellow pilots. Is if we look at stall spin accidents, what you'll find is so many of them occur near the runway and the airport environment, and also have such a high level of fatalities. Is the largest areas you'll see is on the takeoff and climb when we look back at the stall accidents there. But if you go across, start taking a look at the arrival sequence also. Descent and approach, go-arounds, and landings. These three here together, if lumped together, would probably end up being the largest single one. You know, so it's both on the departures and the arrivals that we have those issues. And what we don't want is you to be doing something that is contrary to the regulations, contrary to safety, and uncourteous to your fellow pilots, so that, you know, maybe you end up making them do a go around or something, and they end up having trouble controlling the aircraft or something like that. You know, we just want to avoid those circumstances. And that's why it is so important, if you're flying, you know, at a non-towered airport, please fit in with the flow of traffic. Please fly a standard traffic pattern with everybody else. Now, as we finish off here, we do want to ask, if you're the type that flies at tower-controlled airports, maybe expand your horizons and get in some grass field practice or whatever if you can, or vice versa. If you fly at, you know, the backcountry airports, kind of upgrade a little bit and maybe get in some more tower-type operations with an instructor. Preferably, maybe even when you're doing a flight out of the wings program, because we know that proficiency training works no matter what you do. And, you know, what it does is makes you a better pilot, increases your comfort, helps keep you and all of us that share the airspace with you safe. And, you know, the wings program is try some of these things anytime you're doing a flight review, but better yet, why not do a level of the wings every year and expand your horizons that way? You know, so also, if you did not know, we are continuing it this year also. We did it last year, but there is the Wings Industry Advisory Committee, which helped in creating a sweepstakes, $10,000. It's divided up a few places, but at least 4 people, if I recall correctly, get $1,500 for achieving a level of wings. And when you achieve a level of wings, you can click right on My Rewards and automatically enter you for that. I just achieved another level of wings the other day. I would like to say that I clicked on Claim My Reward to get entered in the sweepstakes, but I'm not eligible being an FAA person, but you are. So please do get out there, you know, be a proficient pilot, do an annual proficiency program, and we have the Wings program is available for you there. Here's some of the references that we did use today. I do know, look for a future edition of the Airplane Flying Handbook. This morning, I know I was reviewing some proposed changes to that already, so that should be coming out. The advisory circular on non-towered airports is available on the download here today. And if you do want to get in touch with any of us, here is our contact information. Do appreciate you joining us today and want to thank you.